Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to here to speak today. As I have witnessed this community over the past few months, I see that it is very warm and very welcoming, and I'm grateful to be here. So thank you for that. Having said that, I have one foot planted on my field of power and the other one hanging over a swamp of terror. And I'm going to hold that one lightly because that's what we do when we're navigating this field of our power. Ernest Holmes said, "There is something within you beyond all doubt and fear, something which has never been limited by your acts or destroyed by your feeling. It is the only something that can make you whole." And to make myself whole, I'm going to put my glasses on. During the Circle Up prayer before the service started, Mike said, "Brad's going to tell us some things today that we already know, but we need to hear again." And that's kind of what I hope to do, and I understand that you all know what I'm talking about to some degree or other. I'm going to attempt to relate to this principle, this something within us beyond all doubt and fear, from my personal experience, in hopes that it will resonate with each one of you, that we will understand it as a way to have a shared experience of how one works with oneself through the process of deep listening and fiercely activated love to become whole, and then by extension, move that out into every relationship one has in the world, even with perfect strangers. In today's world, nothing is more essential to me than that we learn to come together as a force for truly activated love that seeks commonality and healing. So, a tiny bit about me to contextualize why this is so important to me. As a child, I had a deep spiritual calling. I was a choir boy, an altar boy, an avid churchgoer. As a disillusioned and damaged teen, I left a church that did not protect or serve me, and religion went with it. I went off to live my life. The ensuing years were not without some significant personal challenges, and some that were, to say the least, life-threatening. When I finally began to grapple with that, I found myself with a renewed call to spirit. It began in a 12-step program and evolved into participating in a spiritual community that focused its teachings on New Thought and the Tao Te Ching. That was my first encounter with New Thought, and it has stuck with me, though somewhat in the background, to this day. When a new energy called me, I found One Spirit Learning Alliance and became an interfaith interspiritual minister, a spiritual counselor, a member of the board, and now its president, and I'm currently a student in our new pilot program, the Emergence Leadership Academy. Along the way, I had a 30-year career in the performing arts as a program and artistic director at Harlem Stage, where our work was devoted to artists and communities of color. It was work that dealt with issues in the world through the transformative lens of arts that touches the deepest parts of our humanity. It is from these decades of work, struggle, and redemption that I stand here today with the primary purpose to be whole in myself and of service to the world. So what do I have to add to the work of discovering and working with what Holmes calls the all-powerful medium of the law of God that you don't already know? I have no idea, but here we go. So let me explain the terms I'm using. One of the singularly most important tools I've discovered as a minister, a counselor, a leader, as a person, is listening. It is through deep, deep listening, a listening that happens with our entire being, listening to that still small voice that speaks our truth, a truth channeled from the infinite intelligence of the universe to us and through us. And it is then about extending that process to be in communion with all other sentient beings, the most challenging, of course, being the ones of our own kind. Deep listening is like mastering the art of meditation. It takes constant practice to allow yourself to sink into that place of unfettered spaciousness, which then allows what is essential to emerge and thus respond in kind. Love in action is not simply saying, "I love everyone." It is the activation of love through the intention and the action of that intention. It is the how of love, the work of love. How do we approach each person, each situation with that active intentional work of love, which is an outpouring of the active intentional love that we have first exercised on ourselves? It all sounds kind of easy, right? And yet it's the ongoing work of being human. We are a mass of contradictions, let alone the unique stamp we put on it through our own experience, which begins the moment we leave the womb, maybe even sooner. The way forward to wholeness is, as I've discovered, been embedded in all the major wisdom traditions, as well as the science of the mind, psychology. If you talk to my therapist, he essentially says the same thing New Thought does. You have complete control of your life and can make of it anything you want. All you have to do is manage the impulses you have put there to block your path since you were a child who had no control. There have been countless times on the couch when I've gotten really upset about the process of overcoming what I see as getting in my way, and his favorite retort is, "You're fighting a war that does not exist. It was over decades ago. There's no one on the battlefield but you waving your weapons and screaming into thin air. It was over once you became adult and had full control of your life." All the little things that we weave into a complex web to protect ourselves from difficult feelings when we didn't have control are trappings that keep us stuck in a cycle of unrealized wholeness. To begin to unravel that, and you begin to get somewhere. You begin to get to self-actualization. New Thought, as has been beautifully articulated from the last two speakers this month, is a brilliant understanding and toolbox for this process. Likewise, my yoga teacher just last week, being his brilliant and deeply spiritual self, offered this: use your entire being to perfect the bend of the leg. A simple instruction with profound implications. Very Zen, right? This requires a deep listening and surrender of all that gets in the way of this simple concentration and an allowance that singularly focuses on the success of this simple action, which then translates into any action we take in life. Think about it. Think about all the times you've let the inferences of your mind drive a simple action, and thus it becomes a complicated tangle of pushing and pulling, competing and showing, worrying about how we are perceived, how we achieve, how we measure up, how they measure up, and the list goes on and on and on. He also talked about meditation and a typical response from people: I can't meditate, I can't shut off my mind, I can't focus on my breath, I'm not going to do it. Now, we all just meditated, so I think we all have some skill at this perhaps, but maybe this is the only time some of you do it. The truth is that meditation is not about controlling the mind or letting go of it. It is to observe the mind and how it works, what we hold on to. And by doing that, we come to a deeper understanding of what drives us, our desires, and what we are attached to. Only then can we begin the surrender to that which reveals who we really are. Only in that unbiased revealing can we begin to understand the source of its focus and begin to shift it to serve ourselves. In this deep listening, practice and observation are key. Not holding on is the task, and it is through repeated application that we begin to unfold. The conundrum in all of this is that as much as we want the journey to be straightforward and think that it should flow naturally from our intellectual understanding of it, it is so much more complex, because it entails an unraveling and a revealing of the subconscious machinations that we've built up over decades. And then it is all subject to change when deeper truths are revealed. You may, for example, come to the realization that something you thought you wanted desperately all your life is not what you really want at all. Allowing for those changes to happen means more letting go, and so on and so on. I'm a strong believer in practice that we do consistently, which allows us to sink to that place of deep listening. It becomes an essential tool in unraveling and reaching our wholeness. So whatever your practice is, practice it. And trust me, I am far from perfect when it comes to consistency, but I keep going back to it and back to it and back to it, and that is part of the practice in itself. And whatever you do, do not beat yourself up. Also, the practice can happen at any time and all the time. One can sink in, can meditate, whatever you want to call it, in an instant, in a breath, anywhere, walking down the streets, through the woods, at the beach. Just try taking a mental pause, a centering breath, the next time you're walking to an appointment to meet someone or something like that, especially if it's a charged circumstance. Or at a dinner party in the midst of a heated discussion. Just take a breath, center yourself. Maybe you attach an inspiring word to that breath. Whatever it takes to get you there. See what happens. All of this can only be successful if you guide the process with a gentle hand and active love for yourself. And rather than falling into the trap of constantly asking, why is this happening? Simply accept that it's there, surrender to that acceptance, and step into the serenity of that surrender. Only then can a new paradigm emerge. Asking why all the time is just another means of staying stuck. It is in this simple act of deep listening, through active love, no matter what, putting one foot in front of the other, that we begin to increasingly discover our whole and true selves and realize it into existence. At the age of 66, I am in some very substantial ways just discovering and embracing this process. But I have backup. The backup I believe that we all have is that on some level we've been living this all our lives, just not to its full potential. Our true selves have a way of surviving and eking out through the cracks, even if buried. So a lot of what I've been discovering has been there. I've just failed to recognize it, trust it fully, and thus engage in it more completely. I have to remember to breathe. Parker Palmer, another great teacher who I hope some of you know, but if you don't, I'm happy to share the resources, wrote two beautiful books I think are essential reading today, A Hidden Wholeness and Healing the Heart of Democracy. In the former, he quotes Thomas Merton as claiming that there is in all things a hidden wholeness. He further talks about how we end up living divided lives, so far removed from the truth we hold within that we cannot know the integrity that comes from being what you are. Wholeness, he says, does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as an integral part of life. The soul's order can never be destroyed. We may forget or deny that its guidance is close at hand, yet we are still in the soul's backyard, with chance after chance to regain our bearings. When we catch sight of the soul, we survive the blizzard without losing our hope or our way. When we catch sight of the soul, we can become healers in a wounded world, in the family, in the neighborhood, in the workplace, in political life, as we call back to our hidden wholeness amid the violence of the storm. So whether we draw our strength from the words of Ernest Holmes in New Thought, Parker Palmer, our therapist, the Buddhist Eightfold Path, and so on, we have a multitude of wisdom and tools at our disposal to help us work on ourselves. The task is to listen, love, and proceed, knowing that we will falter, and holding each misstep with a gentle hand and heart as we put the next foot forward. So that brings me from the micro to the macro. The quality of the work that we do on ourselves, that deep listening and active love, is truly measured in how we respond to others in the world. What we project onto others is the real test of how we sit in our own wholeness. In our most intimate relationships with a spouse, for instance, who we transfer all kinds of stuff onto, to how we respond to or feel about perfect strangers. We are filtering all this through our beings, through all of the information we've gathered and all the subsequent internal biases that come with it and all the work that we've put into our highest self. And not only do we have to deal with our own conditioning and that of another, but now we're being confronted with systemic issues we have for generations taken for granted or just been ignorant about. I, for one, welcome the opportunity to examine these things within myself as we are confronted with issues of equity, equality, inclusion, climate change, and so on, coming from multiple fronts. For me, the key in this is also to lead with deep listening and love. It is also to unpack these things without shame or blame, but with an openness to accept what has happened, what is happening, and to examine how I might be a part of perpetuating it today and work towards shifting my role in it. I see this as the world and its truth opening fully and completely and offering a chance to accept it and change it where it is needed. What a gift. It's easy to feel beat up by this, especially when it comes with so much anger and divisiveness all the time, or at times, I should say. But that's when it's most important to take that deep, intentional, meditative breath and take a step into the change that needs to be, with love. And that's for you to decide. How do I, even in the smallest way, contribute to sexism, racism, homophobia, and so on? I don't believe any of us are exempt from this. It's just a question of how we choose to move through it, to change what is needed in the world. And it is undeniable to anyone with a pulse that the world is in turmoil and needs an army of sacred warriors to help make a huge paradigm shift. I choose to see the divine, the face of God, in everyone I meet, everyone. If I start with that activated love, the rest will follow with courageous action. To close, I want to invoke the words of another great mind and mentor of mine. Andrew Harvey ignited a fire in me when I first heard him speak about his life's passion, sacred activism. It perfectly aligned with the activist thrust of my work in the arts, and it illuminated the way into a spiritual path that spoke to me. So here's a taste of what he has to say about the world today, a worldview I happen to share. What Andrew is so passionate about, as many of my fellow travelers are, is the idea of becoming sacred activists, of approaching everything through radical love and action. Janine spoke just 2 weeks ago of us being at a spiritual crossroads, and that we here can become active agents of change, for change and healing through love and compassion, and the power given to us by following the principles of new thought. Andrew believes that a central truth of our time is that the world is going through a global dark night of the soul. For many, it makes it a supreme task to engage with the world without losing our balance. What he says is this: the process is terrible and terrifying. Don't be afraid. Love is behind all of this. Connect in the deepest ways with that love. Connect with all who are suffering. Don't be paralyzed by the suffering. Do your inner practice and immediately start doing something in your life that will give it meaning and purpose. It doesn't mean you won't be rattled by profound heartbreak, but if you are doing the practices and trust them, they will build in you a strength of and a fearlessness and a level of calm and peace that will enable you to stay loving and active come what may. We've come to the moment when we are either going to choose to unite the deepest spirituality with the clearest, most inspired, guided action, or die out. And if we can unite it, not only will we be able to, at 1 minute to midnight, reverse the situation, but more importantly even, we'll give birth to the divine in us at a level we've never done before and realize our evolutionary destiny, which is to be an embodied divine humanity, human. We're at a moment when 3 great realizations are coming together. Science is revealing secrets and potential of the universe in a way that it has never done before. Mysticism is being taken to a place of universal mysticism, which everyone can connect to. And we have an extraordinary interconnected web with the internet that can connect the whole of the human race in the field that is being opened up by science and mysticism. And the infinite potential of relating to that field in such a way that it can start informing us and helping us grow in extraordinary ways. Give us unprecedented powers to transform ourselves and the world. So in our greatest dereliction, which is where we are now, this is what is emerging. And now it's a race to where. Will we choose hubris, pride, separation, the old story which has always ended in ashes, or a new story, which these 3 great powers merging and dedicate the knowledge we get from to that urgent radical action to preserve and bring into being this new order? The sacred activists, we are the instruments of this force. We are human, we're divine, we are all one. This all begins right here, in the core of each of us, in this tiny community of souls, so that we may, in all aspects of our lives, hold hands virtually with the entirety of humanity, just as we are about to do here literally, when we circle up in our closing benediction. Let us bring peace to the world, and let that peace begin with me. Thank you.